Welcome everybody to season 3 of Bobby Talks. ... Those dots are there to tell you that there's always more to the story. And today's story is Digital Cultures, Live Stories in Virtual Reality. That is the name of the book written by my guest today. He is a gentleman out of Brooklyn, New York. They've just gone through some scary times there. We'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But he is also a gentleman that runs and owns his own consulting firm, business anthropologist out of Maschio Consulting. Been there the last 20 years plus. And before that, he was doing some observational sciences in Papua New Guinea. So he has covered a lot of areas. He's a very interesting person. The reason I had this gentleman on today is we are going to cover the metaverse, virtual realities, digital cultures, and the short-term gains of what we as human beings get from them, but also what are the long-term implications that come from them, because we know that they're there, and so much more along the way. But ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'm sitting here with Thomas Maschio. How you doing, Thomas?
I'm doing well today. I'm glad to be on here.
Yeah, I'm
I'm
glad to
looking
have you,
forward to this
man.
conversation. Yeah.
There's so many fascinating little things about you that I want to touch on before we get too deep into it. But I do want to tell the audience that your primary thing is you're a business anthropologist.
Right.
And a lot of people might not even understand what the anthropology is, let alone what a business anthropologist is. Anthropology is the study of social cultures and things of that nature. You bring that to the business atmosphere, business route. I look at it more as you are somebody who understands the human being inside and out. Tell me if I'm right, tell me if I'm wrong, and you give me your definition of exactly what is it you do with your firm, sir.
So I I behave as an anthropologist, but in commercial settings and business settings. And I'm often hired. Let's say a company has a new emerging technology they're working on. They're trying to design a new product, a new service. They've gotten it out there. They want some feedback about how consumers are understanding it, creating or weaving meaning around it. Um, and so they'll come to me as a consultant and I'll help them understand the meaning that consumers are weaving around their goods and services. And then they take those meanings and insights and hopefully skillfully kind of feed them back into their products and services. So, in a sense, what they're doing is taking the meanings that I've discovered about what their consumers or customers are doing with X, Y, or Z product or service or technology and weaving it, kind of enhancing their products or services or goods by taking those meanings and kind of putting them back in to their goods, products, and services. So they're, in a sense, putting meaning back into the world. The meanings
Yeah.
that I discover, the meanings I discover that their customers are attributing to their products, goods, and services, um, they then take and put back into their products, goods, and services. And those are meanings that they're putting back into the world in a certain sense. So I guess that gives you a sense of what a business anthropologist does. Uh, there are other dimensions to business anthropology. I also do something called corporate cultural work, where I'll go into an organization, perhaps it's having some sort of problem with its social relations. It's not functioning in the way it might. So I'll study the way that the organization functions, and I'll provide recommendations for how it might operate in a better, a smoother fashion. So those studies are called studies of corporate culture.
Okay.
And the previous form of study I was talking about, we'd call that studies of consumer culture. So what I do as a business anthropologist is the same thing I would have done as an academic anthropologist. I study cultures, which culture is uh, beliefs, symbols, meanings that people live by, and which guides their behavior. And that's what I study, whether in the consumer realm, the corporate realm, the realm of corporate culture, the realm of consumer culture. It's still all culture, and I use the techniques and ideas and theories of cultural anthropology, which I'm trained in to do this. And so business anthropology has these dimensions to it. And you're right. When I first started, when I first became a business anthropologist, there was no term business anthropology. People didn't know what that was. People didn't even know, as you said before, what an anthropologist was. A
Yeah.
lot of the people I worked for didn't even know. I would get questions such as, when I first started doing this work, when I left academic anthropology to do this work, people would say, not only what is an anthropologist, they'd ask me, what is an anthropologist? But they sometimes would have a hazy idea of, they confuse physical anthropology and archaeology, and they say, don't you dig up things? And uh, so I'd have to clarify what I was doing and say General Motors or Foot Locker or whatever corporate client I worked for. There was this period at the beginning of my career as a business anthropologist when I have to really explain what I did and who I was, what I was doing, and what an anthropologist was. So that was interesting.
Well, what's interesting about you is that, and kudos to you for, I mean, you guys, or your consulting firm, you early on, you have to sell that to your client. What is this? Why do I need it? Why would it make me successful? What is it going to do to our consumer trend, or our success in long term? And you have to, not just come to the table prepared, but you are setting the table with the definitions and saying, this is what you need. And now you're kind of doing it again, because when I was telling you off camera here, I was Googling, digital cultures and virtual reality and what the differences are and what the similarities are. Your name was the first to pop up, and it's not just because of your book, but because, again, there's new language with this technology that a lot of people aren't even familiar with yet. And now you are kind of reinventing that again. Whether you're the one that's coined it or you're the one pushing the narrative. It's funny how, like, we don't even know that this is a household name yet, and it will be 5-10 years from now. And digital cultures, what an interesting, we're all experiencing it, but we don't
Yeah.
know the names of it yet. So, for you to be able to do that at an early, 20 years ago with your firm there, I think that's pretty impressive that you're still around doing that. And you've got some incredible clients. You said Foot Locker, General Motors. I heard on another podcast you had Google. Those are some pretty impressive things. So congratulations on that, sir.
Oh, thanks. uh, yeah, I've worked for a range of clients. It's kind of run the gamut from retail clients, technology firms, car manufacturers like General Motors and others. So, and each category, I'm sorry, that's a language. I should explain that. The category of goods or services like technology or automotive, each category presents its own challenges for me to understand. Uh, but the techniques and the ideas of cultural anthropology are what I rely on to try to understand those categories. And lately, I'd say in the last 6 or 7 years, I've mostly been working in the technology category or field, mostly for big technology companies, like one of which is Google. And it's actually the work I did for Google that um, it's a major part of the book that I wrote on digital cultures and virtual reality. Um, so
Well, what I would like to do,
yeah,
before we get too deep into that, is
yeah,
I just like to press pause, and
yeah,
bring it down to the human element here a little bit. You were just talking to me off camera, and actually right around the time that I reached out to you to get you to come onto the show was right around the subway shooting, that took place there. Thomas is out of Brooklyn, New York. And that is a surreal moment for not just, New Yorkers, but for yourself. Give me a little bit of where you were at that day, just your thought, your process, and how, what happens to the zeitgeist of the day, or the, what's going on in New York City that day? Is it just like, do people just expect this now, or is it always still shocking when something like this happens? Because it always seems to be that New York is the epicenter of these things, because, I mean, for all the obvious reasons. But just take me through your day a little bit, and some of the things that took place and how you mentally have come from that, and how you're doing now.
Yeah. So I'm renovating my apartment in Park Slope, Brooklyn, which and so I'm right there. I'm not there now because I'm renovating my apartment. I had to move out. I was lucky, but that day, um, I was going to pick up some chairs to bring to the renovated apartment under renovation. So I drove out to Queens. I picked up and bought these chairs, and I started driving toward the apartment, and my phone kept going off. There were these alerts. There's a security situation in the neighborhood. You know, I didn't stop. I just kept driving to my apartment, to the neighborhood. I got there and the place was in lockdown. I took some side streets and I got to the apartment and delivered the chairs to my lockup in the basement. But there were helicopters all around, there were police and fire trucks. Um, People were just milling about, gawking, and there was a lot of fear. I saw people coming out of the train station, just piling out. So I arrived just after the shooting had taken place, um, somewhat after, but it just seemed like chaos. And I just was very thankful that I had not. The train station where um, the shooting took place is the train station I use normally. Um, I'm not living there now because my apartment's being renovated, but it's also the train station my daughter uses to go to school. And she would have that the shooting took place at about 8 something, right? No, she would have she would have been on one of those trains near that time, approximate to that time. So it was just I was just really shaken by that, and I just thanked God that we weren't there, we weren't at that place, and it's amazing no one was killed, but a lot of
Yeah.
people were hurt. So anyway, and then the the neighborhood is very interesting, diverse, but it's working class, and those sorts of things don't happen there usually. I mean, it was just a shock for so many people, and it took a long time took a few days, weeks for people to really recover and be able to kind of go to this take that train and get on that train station there again. And a lot of my neighbors I talked to, they were feeling tentative about going back in the subway system. But now things have kind of, we're very vigilant now, but so we've had this dramatic event, but things are going forward, and we're trying to do the best we can.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I'm kind of just very grateful that I wasn't in the middle of that. That I was kind of on the periphery.
Well, given what happened, during 9/11, and I don't know where your whereabouts were. Were you a New York resident then?
Yeah, my watch
Yeah.
was back in New York. Yeah, that
You
was
know,
another.
I'm old enough to know that life was different prior to 9/11 and life is different after 9/11. And there's just this, I don't know if we're conscious of it now because we've been doing it now for 20 plus years, but there's you do kind of have you're looking for those triggers all the time wherever you go, whether you're consciously doing it or just subconsciously, you're kind of observing, and you are the master of observing. Um, do you tend to find yourself when you're in areas of public, spaces? Are you checking your surroundings? Do you find that to be something that you're doing more of today than maybe you did prior to 9/11 or prior to this subway a couple weeks ago? Because
I'm
you
more.
like,
I'm more.
yeah.
I'm more observant, and I don't take things for granted. Um, I think a lot of people feel that way. As an anthropologist, I'm kind of trained to. Um, I'm trained to try to see what people are actually doing, um, to be a bit more observant, maybe a little bit more detached, I suppose, from at least to try to recognize patterns of behavior and when something's a little off or when it's really in sync. And so I think I'm almost trained to have these sorts of ways of looking at people in the world, and so that stands me in good stead, I think, in situations or times like this. My radar is it's pretty
Yeah.
good.
Thomas, do you think it makes people more pessimist today? Do you think that we look at each other, you know, there's a lot of hostility on social media and things of that site, but like just looking at the way we, maybe judge or perceive others, do you think because of that nature, we're more pessimistic because of that? Do you ever find that to be one of your findings, um, or does that not kind of come into play in the things that you're looking at?
I think that um, we can be more overwhelmed because of all the streams of information that are coming at us through social media, through the digital cultures, um, through the explosion of media content, the way we're so wired into that, and we're aware of so much more, and so many more events worldwide.
Yeah.
And we're aware in a visceral way. We're right now we're connected in a visceral way to the war in Ukraine. I mean, we're just seeing these images, and so there's much more information, and a lot of it is bad, and so that makes us somehow can make us more somewhat pessimistic or um, traumatized,
Desensitized?
either desensitized or overly sensitive in a lot of ways. So it's both. So it's a difficult time for people. And but I think I don't know if the world is any worse than it has ever
Right.
been. It
Right.
just I think we know more about the world. We know more in a very visceral, immediate sense than we ever did, and so that's part of it. And that can make people dramatized, and can make them feel somewhat disheartened and sometimes pessimistic. Um, and you see a lot of that in digital culture. You see the pessimism, and you see the animosity that can be created in these spaces. Um, so it's a difficult it is a difficult time.
Well, what's interesting about what you just said, you used the terminology animosity. Um, in each digital culture kind of has their own different, um, what's the word I want to use here? Their own environment, their own ecosystem, right? Whether it be positive, negative, and you work for big tech, and that can tend to be, especially in the social media aspect, that can tend to be animosity or hostile or very angry, with some of the things that are on there, pending what the topic is. But today, given the news of Elon Musk taking over Twitter, which is a huge transaction, $44 billion is what they came upon. But that's a big thing because, he's trying to return it to a private um, business entity. I think that's going to be interesting. And I'm just curious, with your background, your initial thoughts on, I'm sure the ink hasn't even been signed with the ink yet. Maybe it has. I don't know. But it sounds like, for all purposes, that it's going to happen. What are your initial thoughts on Elon Musk taking over Twitter? And what does your expertise tell you about that, especially in that digital culture and space, and us as the consumer of that?
Well, so Twitter is kind of the public forum these days. It's where we get the most immediate sense of how the world is working. It's also a sort of language. It's a kind of, as you said, it's part of its own ecosystem. Each social media platform is its own ecosystem. It's its own kind of what an anthropologist would call its own language game, in the sense that specific form of language is used on each different social media platform. Specific ideas animate the platform, and you have to learn that language if you're going to be skillful user of it. You have to learn the orientation, that the dominant orientation of the social media platform. And Twitter has developed in a way which seems like a first there's a high kind of intellectual content to it. It's kind of the hive mind. It's the nexus of popular culture. It's but has this stand up, this a little bit of a snarky animosity, stand up comic kind of characteristic to it. There's these snarky statements, and then you get these immediate clapbacks, and it's a very, it's evolved in a specific way. The language of Instagram, the aesthetics, the aesthetic principle that guides Instagram, and the language of Instagram is very different from that. And you have to perform differently on Instagram than on Twitter, etc. Each of these platforms.
Thomas, sorry. What you said is interesting to me because it makes me think about Facebook, right? So like Facebook and Twitter, they both kind of have this clapback atmosphere, but one is very much more snarky and more intelligent in its base, where the other one is just aunts and uncles and cousins all arguing with each other. So you're right. I thought that was funny notation there. So
It is. But, actually, I'll talk about Elon Musk in a minute. But, when you really do ethnography, the ethnography of digital cultures, like you spend time with people who are intensive users of these platforms, and maybe they belong to a number of different platforms at once. Most people do, and they switch between them. But anyway, I know there's all this animosity and snarkiness and everything, but when you really get into it and you see the majority of the content that people create and share, um, Facebook, for instance, Instagram, other platforms, it's very commonplace and sometimes quite saccharine and kind of I use the word nice. It's very nice. And one of the discoveries of working in these spaces is how much people are trying to be happy and express or reach kind of ex- there's a lot of expressions of happiness and what that is on these platforms, as well as the snarkiness and animosity and all that stuff, which we hear a lot about and how harmful social media is and all that. But there's also, if you really do the ethnography, you do the research, and you listen to the people who really use it, and if you do that intensively and extensively over a period of time, and you look at their content that they're creating and they're expressing and they're sharing with other people, uh, you see that a lot of it are these commonplace imageries of their moms, their grandpas, or where they got married, where their restaurant, or they'll share something that gave them an emotional lift from the day, in order to gift happiness to others, almost to give
yeah.
other people a lift. So, I mean, I know the people like Bo Burnham make fun of the the saccharine nature of some of this, and see a certain falseness. But I see a real optimistic kind of goodness in a lot of the expressions that I come across on social media. The people I've studied that have been we call them respondents. They're my informants, people I interview. So especially this idea of gifting happiness, which people would say to me again and again, they would say, I like to share something that gives me a feeling of happiness or lifts me emotionally. And I want that aliveness that I feel when I experience that. I want other people to have that as well. So I'll share that on social media. So it's not just all, snarkiness and
No,
all that.
I do wonder because you brought up Bo Burnham, and I find it fascinating that you reference him.
I like him.
Do
I
you
think he's
think,
really a pessimist. He's really okay.
Thomas? How old are you? What's your age?
I'm 65 now.
So I'm just curious if maybe we're operating, even though we're using similar digital spaces, if we're even operating in the same digital space or culture as it, you know what I mean? Because with each generation, there's a different purpose on how they use these things. I'm a teacher of Gen Zers, and they were born into this world. And they use it different than the millennials do. And I
Yeah.
actually think millennials might be the worst abusers of it at times because they vent on Gen Zers are so used to it that they've kind of got 3, 4 different accounts, and they're using them for solely their purpose of kind of like influencing and trying to package themselves one way, which has whole a different kind of implications that come with that. But millennials were the ones that kind of are like already teenagers coming into adulthood when this technology came about. And I at times we can tend to use that poorly. But I just wonder if even we're operating in different digital cultures in the same digital culture. You know what I mean?
Oh, yes. So my young respondents, they're hyper focused on self comparisons and, but also very interesting, um, the way they're developing these platforms. Um, it's very moving almost, for an older person to reboot and go into their world, but which I have to do because these are the people who are really using these and kind of most creatively, like TikTok and all these things. But there's this one guy, Anthony. He's from Bayside, Queens. He was 18, 17, around there. So he he was like a real cool guy, and he would take mirror pics of himself and he'd broadcast what he's doing and all this stuff. But then, he joined Instagram and he started looking around, and trying to kind of frame interesting pictures, interesting events, something that seemed just gave him some sort of insight into the way the world is. He, he was almost taking a kind of Marcel Proust, a Proustian view of these commonplace events and occurrences. So there's this place in Bayside, Queens, is a little park that he'd go to, and he framed up a picture of a very restful, pastoral kind of scene. He called it Garden of Zen. It was a garden in a park there, and it was really cool the way he kind of framed the visual insight of how important this place was to him, and he would go there to relax and read or whatever. And this is one of his special places. And he wanted to provide and share on social media this visual insight that he had about the importance this place had to him. And what he was doing there was something that Marcel Proust did long ago, is seeing something of value in a simple object or place. Of course, Proust saw a world of memories in the Madeleine, the little cookie, and Anthony was seeing a world of meaning in this garden, uh, and he had a lot of his Instagram feed was these visual insights that he was noticing, and that's a term in phenomenology. It's a philosophical theory of phenomenology, but he was noticing, visual noticing was taking place on scale, is taking place at scale among younger people. Could call them Gen Z, Gen Z more than millennials, but so they've taken this technology, this common technology. They don't have expensive cameras or whatever, but they're constantly the amount of visual imagery on the World Wide Web. I forget I have the numbers in my book somewhere, but billions, more photographs than have ever been taken in the history of the human race, and they're on there now. And a lot of it, if you just take a step back as an anthropologist and you look at what they're doing, they're trying to they're trying to express and capture visual insight of some sort. So the technology is, in that sense, been positive, that it makes people notice, and I think that's another kind of positive element that people don't really talk about so much when they talk about Instagram. Like Bo Burnham talks about it as a place where there's all this false imagery and stupidity, and underneath it there may be some authenticity, but I think the major part of it is kind of a authentic quest for insight, taking place at scale and being carried out by young people. Is It's very interesting that they're noticing, and the stereotype is that they've got their heads in their phones and they're not noticing anything, or what are they doing? But here's something that they're doing. It's very, so to be an anthropologist is take a step back from the stereotypes and just observe, and ask people what actually they're doing, and then you'd have to convey that to whoever is interested in that.
This
And it's
is
hard,
your
hard sometimes.
perspective. Your perspective comes off very optimistic, which is great. Because in not even necessarily optimistic, it's just my I guess that's my way of pigeonholing you, and I probably shouldn't do that. But it's just what your findings are, right? And you're so correct in the sense of like there is a sense of insight and search for something, some deeper meaning, or maybe we're trying to tap into something that we don't fully understand. The authenticity part of it is the part that I kind of get tripped up on because I do I do wonder if we do these things because you said there's astronomical amounts of images online, and you know I do wonder if at times we are the authenticity is definitely there and we're genuine in nature. That's definitely there for some, but there's also the underbelly of it, which I do think is loud, maybe much louder than maybe you just spoke on about the whether or not it's authentic and what the validations or the purposes of sending an image of your food or that mirror selfie. I worry about the mental health nature of that because I do, as a school teacher, do see the kids down with their heads in their phone quite a bit. And even though you got to go to their social media or their digital cultures to see what maybe they're trying to share with the world and with you, um, their reality is a different presence altogether. And that's kind of where we are with this show today is
Okay.
about trying to figure out that space of what is reality versus what is virtual reality. And with these new technologies of the metaverse and what Microsoft wants to bring to the table, um, I wonder and I worry, and I'm not a pessimist. I'm an optimist, Tom. Um,
Yeah.
but I do worry that with the technology, we've already committed so much of ourselves to the technology. And then you talk about Elon Musk, and I think he's a pivotal part of this, not just with Twitter, but like what he's doing with Neuralink and things of the nature of putting that on your brain. I'm sure you're familiar with that stuff. Once it becomes not just an extension of us, but a part of us, and then
Yeah.
you mix that into a reality that we can shape and have any identity at any time. And if we don't like it, or if it's not working, we can snap our fingers and just reinvent ourselves. That is much different than what our reality is. Or am I wrong? Is reality just what you make it, what you see, and what's in front of you at the time? Because I think at the end of the day, when you unplug, that's still who you are. And I worry about the mental health and the longevity of ambition and all these things that come with it. And I know I just threw a whole lot at you, Thomas, but I was
Yeah.
just your initial thoughts on, as we transition into kind of what the point of the narrative of the show is today. What's your initial thoughts on digital cultures and long-term implications with human beings?
Okay. So you did throw a lot at me, but
Sorry, that's
no,
I've
no,
been wanting to get this one out for a while. So,
but this is much in the news, and these worries are front and center for everyone. Um, but let's go back to let's just before I start, I'll just say that this is not the only great transition of history, technical transition. Um, so let's talk about the transition to literacy first, and then so the culture I worked in Papua New Guinea was what's called an oral culture. People didn't have a written language. They remembered stories, all the techniques the technical ways of making a house, or these are all remembered. They have oral cultures. The people who live in these cultures, their memory is they have various memory techniques, and but and for remembering history, for remembering uh, technical techniques, for remembering or knowing how to do poetry or remember stories or miss. When you become, we found, when you become literate, you lose some of these abilities. You and you know, if you're familiar with Plato's writings, but he 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 was very worried about the beginnings of literacy because he said people are going to separate from this more communal lifestyle, and they're going to being able to, with language, take a more objective and individualistic view of things and have a longer timeline, can actually write things down, could be put in an archive, it can last for hundreds of years. Um, they're less in the present, they're less involved with each other, they're more individualistic. This new technology of literacy is going to really screw things up. And in a certain way, he was right. I mean, it certainly changed things. It made possible social differentiation, the accumulation of surplus foods and goods, which led to class stratifications, or as one of the consequences of that, a more led to more a greater ability to develop economically, socially. Status was emphasized more. So there's a whole transition that technology enabled or was part of, and there were good and bad parts of that. I don't know if I would give up Shakespeare because, to go back to the culture of Papua New Guinea, I'm not sure, but he was right, and the critics are right about there are other great technical advancements, the printing press, money. Money is a great technical advancement, and that people are against that. Just think of what money does, potentiality you have when you have money. You don't have to, if you have enough of it, you don't have to deal with anyone. You don't have to engage pretty much with anyone. And you have a sense of potential. In the Middle Ages, the Lord, the time of feudalism, Lord would not pay the serf in cash money at all. He really, because that would loosen the bonds between him and his serf. There was a relationship of service there, and people saw money as allowing people to get out from under that kind of personalistic tie. Um, so, and it did, and lead more individualistic lives. So I don't know. People say money is bad, and it's led to all sorts of grievous behaviors, but it's another technological advancement. And now we're at, okay, this is a moment when we have the metaverse, or the beginnings of it anyway. And how should we think about this transitional moment? And I say a lot of the critics are right, and a lot of the optimists are also right. And we have to we have to understand first what it is before we can either condemn or celebrate it. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to understand what it is and how best to manage it, frame it, how best to understand it. Because I think it is like one of these great transitions, like the transition to literacy, or the adoption of money, or the beginnings of the printing press, which spread literacy and book learning to great number of peoples. So I think that this is the beginning of a new world here, and it's been going on for some time. But the beginnings of our smartphone revolution with the culture of mobility, um, uh, which is going to be a part of this. But that was a kind of a mini um, explosion in the culture. this transition to the mobile life, and the next big thing is going to be how we handle the metaverse and virtual reality and virtual existence. And what is it? You know, what is it? How can we understand it so we can manage it and police it or whatever?
Yeah, how do you regulate it? Before we kind of get there, I just want to go back real quick. You were talking about just the technological transitions and maybe these big eras throughout lifetime, literacy. And then you talked about Gutenberg's printing press, and then, um, money, and money, the big factor that money, because that part's always going to be kind of here, right? It's what's interesting though is, in I was quoting. I'm trying to find here like the best reference for this, but I'm kind of on the short term here. I'm not finding it, but it's this idea that technology now, the growth and the acceleration of technology now is happening so astronomically quick. It seems like every day there's something new, and it feels like that's the biggest difference right now. Now, I get it. The optimists, what you're saying, it sounds like, is that we as human beings always find a way, that the critics are always there, and we always kind of adjust, and it's just a new reality that we're a part of. But we gain things, and it seems like we always tend to find a way to gain things, and we will lose things as well. But the things that we gain are inevitable. We have to adjust to them, but we ultimately will be just fine. We'll find a way to get it back to, kind of that balance. It feels though like the technology now is happening at such an accelerating at such a rate though, that we're having a hard time keeping up with it. And I don't know what the implications of that even are before you even get to a metaverse. It's like everything's so new to us that, and that comes with job growth or job rate, trying to keep up with that industry and putting out new jobs that match up to the new technology. Cause it's like, how do you, 330 million people in this country, how do you keep up with, losing, 10 jobs for every one machine that comes in and replaces it? I don't know the answers to that because it's so happening so rapidly. What are your thoughts on just that that critique of technology seems to be advancing much faster than humans can kind of keep up with? Do you think that plays a part in this at all, or will we just find a way to get it kind of back to balance after the tipping point?
Um, 30, was it 35 years ago, Alvin Toffler wrote Future Shock, where he basically said things are moving too quickly in terms of transformation, and we're not really. It's a poem I read once saying the soul travel. Well, things may change externally. The soul travels at a camel's pace. That internally we're much slower beings than that. Um, so I would say that, you know, take the Industrial Revolution, that was an enormously rather quick occurrence, and it was wrenching. It transformed geography, it transformed the nature of work, it transformed everything in a very short time. And so I wouldn't say that, and the number of technical inventions that supported or buttressed the Industrial Revolution were of a number, I guess, for comparative to today. I mean, when you take into account of population sizes and things like that. But so I think we have experienced these sorts of rapid transformations before, and as I said before, there are positive and negative aspects to them. But okay, so now. Um, So what I've been studying is, are we becoming different sorts of people because of all these technical inventions? Social media, the mobile life, uh, is what we consider to be a functioning person different than, let's say, the idea or ideal our grandparents had of what a functioning and good person, skillful person would be? And I'd say that our ideals of personhood what an anthropologist would call personhood, or what a person should be, the skills he or she should have, the ideas and ideals that he or she should live by, the way he or she should work. These things are changing, and they're changing in response to, and in response to, but also we're also driving. It's a kind of interplay between how much our natures are changing from the technologies and how much we're influencing them. But we're becoming much more, we have become more I'd say manic, uh, externalistic, externalistic and extroverted. Externalistic in the sense that we're trying to share content that my parents and even I would not don't like sharing. It's
Right.
just
Would
not
never fathom.
it's not
Yeah.
my culture. I would never, before I started this work, it's just a completely different sense of privacy and personhood and what's appropriate and what are the boundaries of these things have all changed as these technologies developed. Um, so we have a much more externalistic concept of self in the sense externalistic. What do I mean by that? I mean that we externalize our thoughts, our feelings, our lives, our concept of kind of internal separateness from other people might not be as developed. Our boundaries may be kind of looser now. So it's a whole new concept of person coming into being. It's not wholly new. Now, this is where the anthropologist comes in. In the culture of New Guinea that I lived in, it's a rather more external concept of self. You never had a private space to yourself. People were on top of you all the time. Privacy, what's that? Private thoughts? I mean, everything is shared. Foods are shared. Labor is shared. So there are elements of that prior culture and way of being and ideas of personhood which are coming again to the fore in the present time. That's not to say that everything old is new again or something like that. I suppose that's
Right.
what the anthropologist says, but we have had experience of these forms of self and ways of understanding the world before. In fact, our concept of the person as this separate from other human beings, this kind of corporate or individualistic empathy with the entity, with our own kind of inner life and all that, that's an historical development which was a great invention of humankind, but it's not the only way of talking about the self. So we're getting a little off, but I think that in order to address this question of these things harm us, uh, um, we have to consider what kind of people we are now and what kind of people young people are, or what kind of personhood ideals they have, and if their ideas are more extroverted, externalistic, and we shouldn't judge them by, you know, I'm a very introverted person and very rather quiet, and I like my space. I don't like to share too much. Um, but I recognize that I'm not the only way of being in the world, and I'm interested in what these young people are developing. So this is another way to get into this conversation about the metaverse. You could see it as psychologically damaging kind of information overload, um, as too fast a manipulation of new technologies that we don't know the meaning of, as social isolation. It seems that we're sometimes alone together. That quote a book that's been written by a sociologist that people on their young kids on their phone are actually lonely when they're together on social media with people. Um, we could say that they're escaping from real life that they can't deal with, and that's in certain ways. But we have to look a little deeper and see how are they trying to deal with their lives. Is it really totally about social isolation. Are they lonelier? What are they doing? Um, how do we frame this? And I think we talked about literacy before with their positive and negative aspects. I think in this instance, it's going to be the same thing. There are going to be very negative aspects of this, which we probably don't have the vocabulary to talk about yet. And there are going to be very positive aspects. One way of looking at the positive of it is that this space is a new world for them and for us to explore and to gain insight from. I just want to throw that out to you. Like, let's talk about virtual reality a little bit. So, I don't know if you've ever been in one of these really developed HTC Vibes or something, and really developed systems, and you've been sent out um, Earth in a cave, and then you break open the cave, and suddenly you see the Earth and the spatial relationships. You understand the scale of things. I mean, you really understand it in an embodied way. I mean, that's an insight you get from that technology that might not be available to you otherwise, unless you do psychedelic drugs or something, or uh, which people have tried to do. People have been trying to, for thousands of years, to have these sorts of insights and experiences through drugs or shamanic trips as part of religion. So they go to these, they try to get to these, what an anthropologist calls a liminal space, a space where everything seems to be up in the air, where the normal categories of existence don't seem to apply. And those places are places that can give you some sort of insight into something.
The
So
issue though with that is that what'd you call it? Liminal.
like on the boundary, like it's a beyond the
Okay,
boundary. It's kind of in
sure.
between.
The issue with chasing that type of insight, though, is that when you come down from that, when you now you're back to now you have this insight, but like you chase it again, right? So you need to spend either more time in the metaverse trying to get back to that insight because it was so profound, or you want to duplicate it or replicate it somehow. That it removes you from your actual reality, and that's where I worry about those implications, not just as a school teacher and what some of the things that I've seen, not just on the young kids, but like I said earlier with the millennials, just as us as human beings. Here I am. My grandfather just passed this
I'm
past
sorry.
December.
I'm
I
sorry.
appreciate that. And now I've moved in with my grandmother, who I've never in a million years seen or would have been able to foresee the things that have taken place in her. She spends a lot more time now on her phone because she's lost her purpose in life. But I do see that she has kind of been um, taken in now, as our people were, by the technology, because now she's opened herself up to what this world of technology can really give her. And she's quote unquote becoming addicted to it. And she's on it for hours on hours. And again, it's new to her. It's new. And me watching it, I'm both saddened because it wasn't her existence before, and also, um, you know, intrigued by kind of like how she's taking this technology. But the problem, just going back to without getting off topic too much, I feel like when we chase these types of insights, is that, and you're right, people have been chasing them forever, and especially today with the experimental drugs and things that they're still doing that. Joe Rogan talks quite a bit about that on his podcast from time to time, about getting as close to the understanding or the meaning of anything as you can. But I do think when you come back from that, your reality is not what it was when you left it. And every time you leave it, you lose more and more of your reality. Um, that does have mental health implications. And that is where I come from, is even though they exist and we have the access to getting there, should we?
Well, let's. Part of the book is about. There's a chapter in my book about lived stories and virtual reality in journalistic practice.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, how do I like to talk about this? Um, I think you have to bring the insight back to the real world and apply it um, in your life, which is what these journalists were trying to do. They're trying to trying to move people in the in the direction of positive social change um, through virtual reality storytelling, because it's such a visceral, immediate experience for people. I think it'll touch people, inspire them in ways that no other form of storytelling can. So let me just, as an anthropologist, talk about which I often use in my business presentation. I don't tell the clients what I'm doing, but I use this idea of ritual and the Rite Passage, or rites of passage. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, um, but Arnold van Gennep, Victor Turner, Arnold van Gennep wrote in the early 1900s. He wrote a book called Rite Passage, Rites of Passage, and he studied these ritual structures which seem to be universal and keep happening, where there's a separation. There's the ordinary realm. There's a separation from the ordinary realm and a kind of immersion in this liminal space. And then there's where one learns things, one gains insight. One is taught. As I was in Papua New Guinea, I entered something called the men's ceremonial house, and in it contained the sakra, the sacred spirit mass, each of which has a story, different different religious objects, which whose stories are secret until a young person attains a certain age, and then he's initiated. And the initiation has a three-part rite passage structure. The person is usually isolated from the normal, put into this, brought into the men's house and taught these things, isolated for weeks on end, not given much food, trying to, what people are trying to do, the elders are trying to induce in the initiate, the young person, a certain vulnerability or openness of mind, so that the usual suppositions of life and taken for granted reality is shown to be not the only reality, and that there are deeper thoughts and insights. And in the liminal space of that ceremonial house, the initiates are taught that. Then they're supposed to reintegrate. The third phase is reintegration with enhanced insight, but for purpose in the real world, uh, with greater understanding of the religion, of how to live in the world. And so I use that simple idea and three-part structure to try to tell these journalists who are working in virtual reality how to make how people were receiving or understanding this new technology and experiencing it, and how they could affect actual social change, positive, real social change in the world, if they understood this initiation rite passage structure, which people were experiencing when they went into their virtual reality headsets and looked at journalistic content in it. And so we showed people Chris Milk's VR piece, Clouds of Sidra, which is it's about a Syrian refugee camp, right? And VR technology, if it's only going to get more powerful. It gives you you're immersed in that. If you feel like you're right there with that character, right? You feel like you're participating in that life in the Syrian camp, and you're getting a more embodied and visceral, immediate understanding of what life is like there. And it's not like you're watching a documentary and you can change the channel or something. You're locked in that headset in this Syrian refugee camp, and you're kind of participating in this life. You're right there, and you see the difficulty of it. You see the So the idea that journalists are trying to tap into is that this is technology can give you a much more direct line to your moral center and move people to some sort of to ask questions when they come out, to get engaged, because they're in a personalistic. They've often, it's like they had this experience themselves, that they were there, they participated in this place, in this moment, in this time. It's a very immediate, um, it's almost a unmediated experience, mystical. Mystics have dreamt of this for eons, that there'd be unmediated, immediate experience between you and place or person. There's nothing between. There's not a television screen between. There's nothing between you and this experience. It's you are having the experience. You are the I in that space. So again, and then to transition out of that and to do something positive in the world. I mean, contribute money to this, or volunteer, or what, so that was the idea, how to create pieces using virtual reality, and not game stuff or whatever, this wild stuff, but in journalistic content. And we're not doing much of that. The New York Times said, gave away a few million Google Cardboard headsets, and they've been trying to bring virtual reality into the everyday reporting of the New York Times, the daily record of the New York Times. So they recognize that there's something very potentially positive about this, and it has resonance to older cultural forms where people have tried to do this. But you're right. I mean, you really have to bring the insight back. Joseph Campbell, this writer of mythology, I don't know if you heard, he wrote Hero with a Thousand Faces. He called it the boon. When you go off on the hero's journey, or whatever the journey, you have to bring the boon back to your society. And the vision quest of the Plains Indians, it's not just you having this quest. You're supposed to bring something of value back to your society. And I think this is how we have to start thinking of this. Um, that
Can
there
I? Can
are
I?
the.
I want.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I just want to. There's so my mind is just going 1,000 miles per hour here. Um, so let's just take me taking what you just said and now trying to take it back and apply it to my everyday life, which is my students, right? Um, what you're
Education's a big.
saying is so you're right. So there's going to be so many pros to this thing, and in that space of journalism that would bring us to a moral center, the empathy levels that could create within us, because we're experiencing it firsthand. Um, that level of insight, though, you said bringing it back to real life and applying it. Here's my question, and maybe something that we as public educators then at this level need to figure out. I feel like there's a certain level, though, of development that needs to take place with today's youth. And I
Yes.
think that we're behind the eight ball on this. I talk about this quite a bit on the show before about emotional intelligence versus academic intelligence, and how we're not spending enough time on the emotional intelligence side of things. I think what's happening is that right now what I'm seeing is, in not every case, but it feels like a lot of the time, um, the kids aren't using these things as tools, this virtual reality as a tool, so that they can bring it back and make positive changes within their society or within the world at large. They are just consuming it, and never taking those insights and doing anything with them. They're just constantly in this state of consumption. Now,
But that's that way. Let me just stop you there for a sec.
yeah,
So that's the fact that it's like a candy shop for them, like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. That's a strength if it's used right, especially in education. If you could put a kid, because they go crazy for this stuff, and I go crazy. I mean, when I've been in it, I mean, but my daughter just the educational potential. Say you're teaching astronomy or something. And, I mean, just all right. You could drone on about gravity and the effects on a solar system of a star going supernova, or ast- uh, comets coming into your solar system and hitting the planet and all sorts of chaos. And you could drone on about gravitational force, whatever. But you put a kid in that virtual environment, and they really feel that. I mean, they that's a form of learning, perception, and and they can. Same thing with any other subject like let's say climate change. So you're you get drone on and on about whatever, but you put a kid in a virtual environment where there's been an oil spill and the kid is a bird or something. You don't want to introduce trauma, but anyway, you get the sense that it's a much more direct form of learning. Or as an avatar, let's say you want to teach about flight, there's this apparatus or physics, virtual reality physics thing called Birdly. You get in this contraption and you feel the movements of a bird and then you see or you experience in your headset this landscape, and so you're developing the through embodiment. You're feeling you're learning in a certain sense the physics of flight and what a bird feels like. As the technology develops, this is only going to get more, bring us closer to reality. It's called embodied learning, and I think especially with the attention span of kids today, and I think this may be a way to, because of this externalistic sense of self and all that, I think this may be a way of reaching them. Now, there are lots of problems with this. It's sensationalistic. Um, I don't know if you've ever, some of the New York Times pieces I was in, the fight for Fallujah. I mean, you're in the middle of a war zone. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, are you introducing trauma to these kids or whoever? Um,
I feel
the
like
I
you
mean,
will. I feel like we're doing that already.
yeah,
We're overloaded with so many images as it is that I feel like we're already introduced trauma, and we have been for quite some time. Uh, so I guess then, Thomas, then I just to kind of we'll kind of wrap this up a little bit then here. Um, I look at more practical application, right? So my only fear is that I not even a fear. I just want to know how to do it. You know,
yeah,
what should
how
I
to
be
do it.
developing then so that they don't look at it as just consuming, but yet they bring that insight and then apply it, that empathy, that newfound empathy that they have towards their world, and then actually take application in changing their world versus just constantly participating. And I'll give you an example. And participating in a world where they're just consuming. I'll give you an example. TikTok, you know, these videos are 15 seconds to 60
Yeah,
seconds, right? You might get a
my,
60-second video that made you feel emotionally triggered by something, that you sit there, you heart it, you save it, you want to use it, you want to gift it, as you say, to your other social media platforms so that you're sharing this insight, right? But then what do you do after that insight has played its part and you've shared it? You go to the next one, and you then now you're already away from that insight, and now you're on to the next one. And it's not until you get off of all of those things, that you have now this new garnered education and information and insight, which is great, but you also just spent 6, 7, 8 hours on
right.
your screen time, and you are a human being who's still going to have to go to bed, wake up, and then repeat your day the next day. I just want to be able to take it into
Yeah,
application, lose the addiction to the the consuming part of it,
yeah,
which
yeah,
I don't
totally.
think is going to happen. um, but we've
Yeah,
got to be able to, like you said, be able to, as an educated, developed mind, pull ourselves out of it and use it for good rather than just constantly being in a state of consumption. Because yes, we're gaining more empathy, we're more at the moral center, but we're also more traumatized, we're
we could
less
be.
ambitious.
Depends on how the creator of the experience structures it.
Sure, sure, sure.
And if these corporate entities keep going for game, shootings and gamesmanship or whatever they're doing, so but you as an educator, I mean, I think you have to do your lesson plans in a kind of deliberate, just three-part structure, a rite Passage. where you explain. You have to know the structure of what how people enter into this experience and what they can get out of it. And you have to be very clear to them about what you want and how this is going to be used. It's almost like ayahuasca, a guide, a spirit. What you are as an educator, you're a guide, a spirit guide. And you say, this is what the use of this seems to be to me. What perceptions, and you dialogue with them as they're in the experience. You don't just let them. You have to go in there with them. I know it's.
Yes.
I mean, you can't just stand back and even if you're getting nauseous, and you can't just. You got to be in there, and you have to experience with them and dialogue with them in a Socratic way. And then after, when they transition out, you have to be there and develop the insights, get
Yes.
to a slower burn of what do they see and what does it mean. That's the pedagogical process. And I think when you think back, you could think about these technologies, so the addictive qualities and whatever. Um, in the Renaissance, they developed the principle of point perspective, 3 point perspective, whatever. Anyway, 3 dimensional, and that led to being able to see the world in that sort of more detail. Did lead to moral and philosophical advance. Humanism was an outgrowth of the Renaissance, and this ability to see more deeply into the world in various ways that this technology of 3 point perspective gave us. I think we should start thinking about things in those terms, these new technologies, and recognizing that it's going to be hard in our system, which people are always trying to monetize these experiences. But you as an educator, you have to be there with them and guide, almost as a guide to understanding and applying these insights. And so it's an intergenerational interplay between seniors and juniors, as happens in supposedly in all cultures.
Yeah.
Now this is our job now. So we
Yep.
can't just say to these millions of kids, well, you're lost. This is crazy. We have to take everything away from you. Just we could do that for a while, but I think we have to also mediate and learn these things somehow, which was what I'm trying to do. My daughter is teaching me about TikTok, and she uses virtual reality different than I did, and it's I'm just trying to be elder guide or something. It's hard. It's very there are no answers to all your questions, and your fears are quite real, and they can't be dismissed, and they just can be harmful, very harmful. But I think that it's incumbent on people like you to be a kind of elder guide, like when the elders of New Guinea take those kids into the ceremonial house, they have a great responsibility there to guide the insight train and the applicability of these insights to the real world, everyday world. So I don't know. It's it's a big question. Now we're on the verge of Zuckerberg creating this what he calls the metaverse. I'm not quite sure exactly what it is, but it's going to combine virtual reality, augmented reality, all sorts of other technologies. You're going to be able to, like the Oasis in Ready Player One, going to go in
Yeah.
there, which was a lot about education and that how you learn in the Oasis is a big part of that book. But it is huge. It's just another world.
Well, it's a world that is inevitable. We know
Yes.
that. Regulation does not seem to be a thing people want to
Yeah.
do when you can monetize it, and that will happen too.
Yes.
I think the monetizing part of it is the only part of it that, well, that's interesting too, because then you get into the
That's a
crypto
whole other
part.
thing. that's
in
another.
the
Yeah,
yeah, it's going to be interesting. Are we even going to be working physically, or are we all just going to be working
right.
in this virtual
Every
space?
minute. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a thing. Fascinating conversation. I think the regulation portion of it, we could have a whole nother hour and a half conversation on that. But how can you regulate something, Tom, that you don't even know what it is?
I don't know what
Um,
it is. You have to understand what it is.
so what we're going to do is be like you and just be the master of observation. Um, guys, I've been here with Thomas Maschio of Brooklyn, New York. He is also of the Maschio consulting firm. He's written a book, Digital Cultures, Live Stories, and Virtual Reality. Where can they get this book, sir?
Oh, it's published by Routledge. Routledge, and it's you get it as an ebook more cheaply in Kindle through Amazon, or could go to the publisher Routledge, Taylor and Francis Group. Where I think it's on sale now. Um, there are a bunch of I don't have offhand, but Amazon, Routledge are the two. Abe Books. Just type in the title and my name; it'll come up.
Okay, I'll be sure to I'm gonna put all the links and stuff
Oh,
according to all of my when I attach this episode.
it
Um,
was great to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation. Thomas, if you could just stay on real quick as I finish up the broadcast here, and then we'll talk off air. Ladies and gentlemen, this is season 3. A lot of changes going to be taking place this season. If you could just kind of hang on with me, I'm trying to figure out some things. But what we want to do is get a niche, more of the human elements and more of the human themes, because I think that's the thing that connects us all to this show. I've really appreciative of everybody that's subscribed so far, and I hope that you can continue to share the good vibes and share the stories with your friends and family about what this show is and what can help grow it. Thomas, it's been awesome talking with you. We'll see everybody else on down the road. Enjoy your night.
Robert, it's been great talking with you.